1839. A large group of Africans are illegally captured near present-day Sierra Leone in Africa. They are sold illegally to a Portuguese trader who treats them like cargo, or worse, as they cross the Atlantic Ocean. For 10 long weeks, they are packed tightly beneath the deck in the ship's cargo hold. Nearly 1/3 of the slaves die from malnutrition, beatings, and disease along this journey. The ship arrives in Havana, Cuba, where 2 Spanish plantation owners, Pedro Montez and Jose Ruiz, buy 53 of the survivors, 49 men, 3 girls, and 1 boy. The newly purchased slaves are forced to board the Spanish schooner La Amistad and begin their journey to their new home, a Caribbean plantation. What happens next makes this one of the most famous cases in civil rights history. On July 2nd, one of the African slaves, a man by the name of Joseph Cinque, was able to free himself by using a file previously hidden by one of the female slaves. Cinque then freed all of the other slaves, and together they seized control of La Amistad from the crew. 2 of the crew members escaped on a lifeboat. The captain and the cook, however, were not so fortunate. The slaves did spare the lives of their owners, Montez and Ruiz, as well as the captain's personal slave.
Wow! How did their owners manage that?
Montez and Ruiz knew how to navigate the ship, so the Africans let them live because they agreed to sail the ship back to Africa.
Wow. End of story?
Not really.
Oh?
Montez and Ruiz were actually lying straight through their teeth. They tricked the slaves by telling them they were heading towards Africa, when actually they were sailing north along the coast of America towards New York.
How did they pull that off?
By sailing at night.
So the sun wouldn't give away which direction they were heading. Clever, but dishonest.
Finally, they dropped anchor near Long Island, New York on August 26th. There, the Amistad was apprehended by an American brig, the USS Washington. The plantation owners were freed, and the slaves were taken into custody. They were then taken to New Haven, Connecticut.
Wasn't New York closer? Why weren't the slaves taken there?
Because slavery had been outlawed in New York, but it was technically still legal in Connecticut. A case was filed in circuit court in Hartford, Connecticut, charging the slaves with mutiny and murder. President Martin Van Buren voiced his opinion that the slaves should be extradited back to Cuba. The court agreed, stating that since the alleged criminal acts took place on a Spanish ship in Spanish waters, it was a Spanish problem.
But didn't the abolitionists have something to say about that?
Well, yes, they did. What do you know about the abolitionists?
Well, abolitionists are people who want a certain practice or institution stopped. In this case, they were the people who opposed the practice of slavery.
Correct.
So what did the abolitionists do to help the slaves?
They filed a complaint in the Federal District Court of Connecticut against the slave owners, Montez and Ruiz, for assaulting and kidnapping the slaves.
And what were the results?
It was complicated.
Please do explain.
Well, the focus of the case quickly became about who owned the ship, the African captives, and the other cargo.
Property rights?
Yes, property rights. It seems several groups of people thought they were entitled to some or all of the property. The captain of the USS Washington, Thomas R. Getney, felt he deserved what he had seized on the high seas. The Spanish government thought everything should be returned to Spain because of a 1795 anti-piracy treaty between the United States and Spain. Montez and Ruiz wanted their slaves and other cargo returned to them. Antonio Vega, vice consul of Spain, claimed ownership of the captain's personal slave. And Henry Green and Palatia Fordham claimed salvage rights on the ground that they had been the first to discover La Amistad.
That's a lot of people.
Yes, it is. And the whole time, the Africans were saying, "We are not property. We cannot be bought and sold as slaves. We're human beings."
Well, who won? Did they free the slaves?
Yes, the court found that kidnapping and transporting the Africans across the Atlantic violated international slave trade laws. The court held the Africans were free men who had been illegally kidnapped and held so that the alleged mutiny and murders were actually a lawful fight to free themselves. They were not slaves anymore. And then they ordered the government to pay to return the captives back to Africa.
Oh, good. I love happy endings.
Well, not so fast.
Huh?
Under intense political pressure from the southern states and Spain, President Martin Van Buren ordered an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. Former President John Quincy Adams defended the slaves. Adams cited the Declaration of Independence, as he argued that no treaty with Spain should override our country's founding principles, which protect individual rights. The court agreed on March 9, 1841. The Africans could finally go home.
Home sweet home. Well, this time, I certainly hope the captain let them ride up in first class.
Perhaps he did, but it took them until the next year to get that boat launched.
Was there something wrong with the boat?
Nope. When newly elected President John Tyler came into office, he refused to allocate funds for the voyage.
What?
But don't worry, a group of abolitionists quickly formed the Amistad Committee and raised enough money to pay for the Africans to return to their homelands.
Oh, I'll bet that made the southern slave owners mad.
Oh, it did. This case fueled the abolitionist movement in America. It is considered one of the primary cases which led our country into civil war only 20 years later.
And you know what's ironic about that? I just read what the Spanish meaning of the word Amistad is.
What?
Friendship.
Well, on that note, friends, what case would you like to learn about next?